Welcome back to Quantum Thrive. Today we're exploring something that quietly shapes almost every aspect of our well being, whether we realize it or not: life architecture. So, we're looking at the routines, environments, systems, rhythms, and daily structures that either support the life we want or slowly pulls us away from it. Because most people are not failing because they lack insight. We all know that currently there's a massive amount of content and people have access to an enormous amount of information. Um, Mostly they're trying to heal, regulate, grow, and thrive inside systems that continuously recreate stress, overwhelm, exhaustion, and survival mode. So today we're going to slow down and look honestly at the architecture of daily life and whether or not it's there to support you. So we are currently in the spring cycle of quantum, just finishing up, and we've focused on the science and art of well-being. Up till now, we've explored the body, mind, and spirit, relationships and meaning, and now we are moving into the structure that holds all of it together. Because even profound insight eventually collapses if your daily life cannot support it. All of us have seen that. We know all kinds of stuff, and yet we can't seem to move the needle. So today is week 5 of Thrive, which is life architecture, designing routines, environments, and daily systems that support the life you actually want to live. And next week, we'll move into contribution, which will be our final module: how we bring our energy, creativity, care, and gifts into the world in meaningful ways. After that, we'll be transitioning into our summer quantum cycle after the solstice, and that one will be becoming shameless. I do run a lab once a month regularly on this, but this will be an entire semester focused specifically on becoming shameless. So this summer's quantum cycle is becoming shameless, and what we're really exploring inside this container is this: what happens when a woman spends years organizing herself around being acceptable, needed, productive, chosen, emotionally manageable, or being good for other people? Most of the women I work with are not lacking insight. They've done an enormous amount of research, courses, education, but what they're carrying is adaptive identities that were built around survival, attachment, approval, and production. And eventually those identities become exhausting, not because we're weak in any way, shape, or form, but because your nervous system learned that love, safety, belonging, or worth, or all of the above, were conditional. So the becoming shameless process is not about becoming louder, harder, more confident, or performative. It's about becoming coherent. So that looks like being more honest, regulated, aligned, and really, for the most part, more fully yourself. And we look at it through the quantum lens, which gives us the structure of that transformation, right? So the vision, what you actually want to be if you didn't have that conditioning, the alignment, where's the dissonance in your life, awareness. So this is about identifying the actual adaptive patterns that are running automatically and starting to witness them and heal them, shift them. Regulation. So when you start changing, things become uncomfortable, especially when you start changing around people you love. They don't necessarily like it. So we get ahead of the curve, recognizing that it is going to feel uncomfortable when we start changing. And we make sure that we're supporting ourselves in that. Agency, which is what are the ways you can start taking aligned action, um, recognizing where you can make those changes and where you can't. And then finally, embodiment. So, can you actually start behaving as the person and the version of yourself who's capable of holding that life, before everything kind of magically aligns for you to be that person. So that's the deeper work we'll be moving into this summer. That begins on the week of June 21st and extends to the end of August. So check-in time, if you're watching this, this is a reflection back on last session. So that was about relationships. So I want you to take a moment to reflect on the past 2 weeks. Where did you notice your relationships supporting your well-being? And where did you notice stress, disconnection, avoidance, resentment, or overfunctioning showing up? It may be one of those things or all of the above. Take a minute to reflect on the quality of your closest relationships, how connected or isolated you felt, your communication and your boundaries, how confident you felt with those, whether your relationships felt nourishing or draining, and how much space your life currently allows for meaningful connection. And notice what patterns are becoming visible. I would recommend you pausing the video here if you'd like for a few minutes to journal about that and see if you can't kind of start connecting some dots on all of that. In session, we'll take some time to share and support each other in that. So today's session is about stabilizing the architectural foundations of well-being. So designing routines, environments, and daily systems that support the life you want to live. Because transformation isn't just psychological, mental, intellectual, it's actually structural. So to do a quick review, earlier in quantum, we explored Federico Fagin's idea that the self functions like an integrated system. He speaks a lot about quantum physics, body, mind, and spirit, distinct dimensions of experience that must remain in dynamic balance. And when one area becomes chronically strained, the entire system compensates. So the body's represents our biological and sensory experience. The mind represents cognition and interpretation. And spirit represents meaning, values, orientation, and purpose. And flourishing tends to emerge when these systems are coherent and working together rather than constantly pulling against one another. One of the things that I love about the way he describes this is that it's not linear, right? It's more like a color wheel where each of these aspects overlaps with the other. So between those dimensions, we get overlapping zones, as I said before, and those are behavior, meaning, and authenticity. And this is where life architecture becomes incredibly important because your systems either reinforce coherence or they reinforce fragmentation, right? And so this week we're looking at mind and body, which is we're looking at behavior for the most part. So for the next session, we're going to explore what the research actually says about thriving environments, sustainable well-being. And if you've been following along previous to this, I had these slides as part 1 and 2, and then the quantum lens was part 3, and the smarts video was part 4. I've simplified it because I was finding people were finding it confusing. So moving forward, each of these content videos will be part 1, and then the quantum lens is part 2, and then the smarts application is part 3. And so you'll see I've made the appropriate changes in the playlist for you. So what the research found, what's fascinating is that almost every major well-being and longevity framework eventually lands in the same place. People usually think flourishing is about mindset, motivation, discipline, like making yourself do it, or healing, or all of the above again. But the research keeps pointing somewhere a little more practical, which is incredibly helpful for all of us, because if you've ever tried healing your childhood emotional wounds, we all know that takes a while. And so what's really kind of neat about this is it's actually a lot simpler than we've ever thought. So it's a lot more practical. Your environment and routines either reinforce your values and goals or it dismantles them. Pretty straightforward. Most people are trying to transform while living inside systems that recreate the exact same state that we're trying to escape, right? So research consistently shows that well-being is strongly influenced by stable rhythms and routines, supportive environments, reduced decision fatigue, built-in social connection, intentional restoration, and recovery. Big one that the type A personality rarely gets. Alignment between values and daily life, and small repeated behaviors over time. The Atomic Habit books is phenomenal for talking about this. So the goal isn't perfect discipline. It's creating a life that naturally supports the version of yourself you're trying to become. So I've broken it down into 5 different categories. The first of which is rhythm. So humans regulate through rhythm, consistent sleep, meals, predictable recovery, sustainable pacing. Your nervous system likes coherence and predictability, does not like chaos. Research consistently shows that irregular schedules increase stress load and impair emotional regulation. That's why you can't keep your self together when you're tired and stressed out. Um, this is one reason people often feel dramatically better on retreat or vacation. And it's not because everything's magically solved in that minute, but it's because the system finally experiences rhythm instead of constant interruption. As you move through these slides, reflect honestly on your baseline, not idealized behavior. What you're looking at is your actual lived experience. Um, so pause here if you'd like to complete the rhythm assessment. We're going to pop through what the research shows. Here's some concrete examples from the research and some everyday examples to kind of help you out there. So here's your baseline there. So you can rank yourself optimal, give yourself a score of about 6 to 7, mid-range 4 to 5, or strained is between 1 to 3. So next up is your environment. Behavior is shaped far more by environment than most people realize it. Humans dramatically overestimate willpower. Your surroundings constantly cue your behavior, right? Your physical space, your digital environment, your systems, your clutter, your friction points. Healthy environments reduce overwhelm. Unhealthy environments create constant invisible resistance. And often what people call laziness is actually exhaustion from poorly designed systems. And I'm often when I used to design spaces, I was a form follows function kind of designer. Yes, I want things to be aesthetically beautiful, but I also recognize that when your space is set up to support you, life feels very, very different. So here's some concrete examples from the research. Some everyday examples. And then take a moment here to pause the video. You can give yourself a ranking on that one. So number 3 is connection. It's your third pillar. One of the strongest findings across well-being and longevity research is the importance of meaningful relationships. So if you've been following along on this semester, you will see that this is not the first time that this has come up. It comes up over and over, almost in every single module, because that is how important it was. It was one of the most shocking pieces of research that they realized. It was not what they were expecting to see, but over and over again, they find that the quality of your meaningful relationships is more important than whether or not you smoke and the food you eat or whether or not you're physically active. So one of the most incredibly important things. So we're not talking surface level interaction here. We're talking about actually feeling supported, feeling like you belong. It's like that relational nourishment. The Harvard Adult Development Study found that relationships quality was one of the strongest predictors of long-term happiness and health. And loneliness is not just emotional, it's structural, right? So you're asking, do you have time for connection? Do you have energy for connection? Do you get off work often enough to actually have connection? Do you have access to community? Do you have ritualized support? Or has your life become organized entirely around productivity or survival? And that's a real issue in this day and age where housing prices are so high. Um, Even just groceries have gone astronomically high. So, in terms of survival and looking after yourself, um, it's a really important question. So some everyday examples, and then give yourself a baseline score on connection. So next we're looking at restoration. So humans are not designed for constant activation. Busy, 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 right? Recovery is not laziness, it's a biological necessity. One of the biggest problems in our modern culture is that people treat rest as though it's something they actually have to earn after you've basically collapsed. But thriving systems build restoration into daily life. And so we see this in all of the blue zones. It's just built in, it's there. Stillness, nature, play, time to laugh together, time to reflect together, joy, recovery, whimsy, right? Without restoration, the nervous system eventually shifts into chronic survival mode. Fight or flight's always activated, and it's just really bad for your system. So what your research shows, some concrete examples, and everyday examples for your reference. So give yourself a score on your restoration baseline there. Our final pillar is alignment. This is where daily life reflects values, meanings, and identity. Research consistently shows that people experience greater well-being when there's coherence between who they are, what they value, and how they actually live. This is often sorry, Clementine's saying hello to us. This is often where people feel the deepest exhaustion, right? Because externally life may look successful, but internally they feel disconnected from themselves. So alignment asks, does your calendar reflect your values, right? So when you actually look at what's happening on a daily basis, are you actually getting what you need? Does your life support your humanity or only your obligations? Duty, 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 right? So here's some everyday examples. So give yourself an assessment on your alignment baseline. So when life architecture becomes strained, these are often the patterns we see. Overwhelm, exhaustion, collapse cycles, decision fatigue. My gosh, the number of choices we're having to make each day. Reactive living, difficulty sustaining routines, disconnection from meaning. And importantly, this usually isn't a character flaw, right? It's often a systems problem. Most of the women I work with already know what would help them feel better. Ask any of them. They can actually tell you. The problem is not a lack of awareness. The problem is that their lives are structured around urgency over responsibility, productivity, and survival. And I'll just put an aside here. This is what Shameless is all about. So, becoming shameless, I put that program together to actually address these aspects, right? Why are we structuring ourselves and our lives and our identities around urgency, being responsible and productive, and constantly giving? So, they try to use discipline to compensate for unsupported systems, and eventually they become exhausted instead of restored. So, you end up managing life instead of actually living it. So now we're going to move into our global assessment. So we're going to take a moment to look at the big full picture, noticing where your systems feel nourished and where it feels depleted. So take a minute to lay everything out on your well-being wheel. You can pause and um, print it out if you want. Fill in the little squares and color them in. Um, and as you're moving through the system, I want you to remember the goal here is not perfection. It's about becoming aware, right? Because awareness is the space that creates choice, and choice is where your agency lives. So once you have a chance to get that done, if you're not finished it yet, just take a moment to pause the video, get your pencil, crayons, or markers out and have some fun coloring that in. And what you essentially want to do, I'll pop back there for a minute, is to kind of look back and say, oh, it's not letting me move back. Sorry about that for whatever reason. There we go. You're going to want to kind of draw from 1 to 7, coloring in each of these little squares. And then you can get a really quick global overview of how well you're doing in each of those 5 segments. It helps you spotlight which one that you're doing best in and which you're struggling in. So I want you to look at as we pop over, which of those areas feels most expensive for your system right now. It's the one that's costing you the most energy. It's not necessarily the worst area, but it's the one that creates your greatest strain. So if you identify that your house is not set up to support you, that's a foundational piece that if you adjust that, it's going to make a really big impact on all of the others. And then I want you to take a few minutes and journal about what specifically makes this score what it is, right? So really identify the pieces that are undermining your life so that we can reverse engineer it. So pause the video here and take some more time to journal if you're needing that. So your life is shaped less by what you intend occasionally and more by what your environment, routines, and system reinforce each and every day. Tiny repeated experiences actually become your identity, and your identity becomes your reality. And I will really reinforce here that small, tiny atomic changes, teeny, 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 tiny things are what your system can sustain much better than giant identity leaps, right? So you try the least, tiniest, smallest thing that you can shift. So next you'll move into the quantum process section of the workshop. So if you pop over to, I've now named it part 2. Sorry, here we go. Part 2, I've changed it to part 2, the quantum process. You'll see it named that in the playlist, and you'll take that category that you've identified and put it through that quantum process lens. And then finally, you'll begin translating the awareness and the intention action using your SMARTS framework. So we're looking at specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And I have added supported because if your changes aren't supported, it's really difficult to make those shifts. Because thriving doesn't come from insight alone. It comes from creating systems that help insights become lived reality. So take a minute to finish up this video, journal your thoughts on it, pop over to part 2, the quantum process, and finally part 3. And then we'll meet again in 2 weeks to discuss our insights of moving through that and trying to make those shifts and see what that felt like. Thanks so much for joining me today, and we'll see you next time.